Brand new podcast, something I've been wanting to do for quite some time. For those of you who don't know my voice, for those of you who don't know my face, my name is Jake Boucher. I live in Massachusetts, and I've had this responsibility to myself, this desire to start this podcast the last couple months. I've had thoughts of it. I Googled, is anyone else doing a podcast like this? The answer was yes, people are doing something like this. Is anyone doing it exactly like I am? The answer is no one's doing it exactly like I am. This podcast is about my favorite quotes. I've compiled probably close to 1,000 quotes at this point from things I've watched, things I've read, things I've listened to, experienced over the last 5 to 8 years. I got multiple pages of notes, not even just in my notes app on my phone, in my laptop, of all the notes or quotes I've collected from the materials that I've consumed, content I've consumed. And now I want to put that in the podcast form. And for each quote, I'm going to talk about, actually, before I even get into that, I don't even have a name for this podcast as of this recording. So we'll see what that turns out to be before this first episode's up. But for every quote that I'm going to discuss, it's going to follow a very similar framework. It's going to be what was happening in this person's life when they said the quote, what the quote actually means, what's the mistaken interpretation that most people have of this quote, how does this quote apply to creatives, self-improvement, and people reinventing themselves, because that's what I'm passionate about. That's what I'm currently experiencing. What I'm going through is just trying to reinvent myself, trying to improve myself as a human being and as a man. The next thing is adding one practical mindset shift, habit, or real world example to this quote, referencing something in my own life where I've lived this quote. All right, without further ado, we're gonna get into quote number 1 for this new podcast, which the goal is to have this come out weekly. The price of greatness is responsibility. Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill is such a fascinating historical figure. For those of you who aren't familiar with him, he was the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II, and he was Prime Minister once again afterwards. He was a prisoner of war at one point in time, not during World War II, but when he was a younger person, and he escaped. He escaped from being a prisoner of war. So what was happening in his life when they said this quote? At this point in time, World War II was raging on. It was September 6th, 1943, when he specifically said this quote. Prime Minister of Great Britain, so he had the ultimate responsibility. He was one of the most important men in the world at this time. His decisions for the Dunkirk situation in 1941 are talked around the world when it comes to discussing World War II. Without his decision for that Dunkirk situation, history might have looked differently. He had a tremendous responsibility. Every moment of every single day, his responsibility was unmatched, stressful, I'm sure riddled with anxiety every moment of every day. September 6, 1943, he was at Harvard University in Massachusetts accepting his honorary degree, or he got an honorary degree from the university. This was a 40-minute speech, and there was no prior announcement that he was coming to Harvard to accept this honorary degree. All that was known was that a distinguished world leader was coming to Harvard. That was all that was mentioned. So he saw this as an opportunity because at this point in time, the American public was becoming weary of the war effort, the war in general. And his speech was designed to steal the public resolve and remind them of the global obligations. Because at this point in time, it's almost 2 years into the war for the Americans. Almost 2 years since Pearl Harbor happened, which was on December 7th, 1941. So 2 years. And at that point in time, people are making sacrifices, even ordinary citizens. They're rationing food, they're rationing materials, a lot of them are participating in the war effort in the States by making ammunition, by making the food, so on and so forth. They're all contributing to the war effort. And the war was dragging on, and at this point in time, there was no end in sight. So they're becoming weary. It's like, is what we're doing worth it? That's my interpretation of it, at least. So momentum at this point in time was building for the Allies, though. In July 1943, they successfully landed on continental Europe for the first time through Italy. Italy was very difficult to navigate through for the Allies. They didn't have a ton of success there because of the terrain and that sort of thing. And this was before D-Day invasion, obviously, by 9 months or so. So this is a crucial period, and Churchill knew that the Allies could not win the war without the American support. This quote, what it actually means, not really related to the war effort or anything like that, but just taking full responsibility for your actions and that of your team. I think any good leader, I look up to leaders that take responsibility for their own actions. I have a hard time accepting leaders that don't take responsibility for their own actions. It's one of the things you should do as a human being, is take responsibility for your own actions. Finding a scapegoat, that shouldn't you shouldn't want to do that. You shouldn't need to do that. Yes, it's uncomfortable taking responsibility for your actions when you do it. Yes, it might feel crappy, but that's the right way to go about it. Some of you might disagree, but I don't know how you could. The second bullet point that I have for what this quote actually means: anyone who seeks to be great must accept everything that comes with that challenge. To get to the mountaintop, there's going to be challenges upon challenges. Any successful person that you see, I want to use Elon Musk because I always see this picture of him in this big warehouse with a bunch of parts just scattered all over the floor. If I can find it, I'll pop it up on the screen for you video viewers. I picture that when he was in the beginning stages of building SpaceX. There's all these parts scattered everywhere. At that point in time, from an outside perspective, you're thinking, how is this guy ever going to be able to build what he's been saying he wants to build? He's just sitting there contemplating, looking at everything. The challenges that he had to go through personally must have been insurmountable for most people to get through. But he persevered. He kept going. I'm sure there was moments in time where he felt like giving up. I'm sure there was moments in time where the people that he was with that were helping him build his dream wanted to give up. And I'm sure at moments Elon had to take responsibility for his actions, had to take responsibility for the failures so he could keep the team together. I'm sure all of that was going on. And the third bullet point I have for what this quote actually means is: with power and influence comes the duty of ensuring that one's power is not used for harm. There's a lot of examples of world leaders throughout history that use their power for harm. They use their influence to harm others, other countries, other human beings, etc. I'm sure some of you watching or listening right now can think of current world leaders that reflect this. Power easily corrupts. Once you get power, it's very tempting to go down a dark path. Think of Napoleon, for example. Napoleon, for a while, used his power for his purposes correctly. Then it got to the point where it started to corrupt him. When he became Emperor of France, he had even more power than he originally had. And he started going downhill with the more power that he accumulated, and eventually got to the point where he was a prisoner on an isolated island in the Mediterranean. The power corrupted him, as it corrupts many people. You can be at the top of the mountaintop, but if you don't manage your power correctly, you're going to go to the bottom of the mountain. It's a fine balance that you have to navigate. The price of greatness is responsibility. Take responsibility that you're being corrupted by the power, and you got to do something about it. You got to change your ways. You got to listen to people, because once you get that power corruption in your head, once you think you're invincible, you stop listening to others that are telling you to take it down a peg, as he did with his Talleyrand. Talleyrand was trying to help him, and eventually got to the point where Talleyrand turned on Napoleon because he was just too corrupted. The power just got to him. What's the mistaken interpretation most people have of this quote? A lot of people apply it to personal, psychological responsibility rather than geopolitical responsibility, which is what I just kind of did. They're interchangeable. I just easily used it to talk about personal struggles, psychological responsibility. And also, you can use it for the geopolitical responsibility, which was what it was originally intended to do, which is what Churchill's intention was for it. Mistaken interpretation most people have, it's a call. So that's the mistaken interpretation we just mentioned, but it's a call to the United States to accept this new leadership role in the world because they're a rising global power. They can't be ignored anymore. And like I said at the beginning, Churchill recognized that he needed the United States in order to defeat the Axis powers. That was how he envisioned this war coming to an end. That was the only way he envisioned the Allies beating the Axis powers, is with U.S. support. Without it, who knows what history would have looked like if the United States backed out of World War II. Who knows what could have happened. How does this quote apply to creatives, self-improvement, and people reinventing themselves? I got here: accept the hard work and sacrifice needed to be great. You're not just going to skirt by and fall into greatness. It takes constant effort, constant time, energy, so on and so forth. I'm going to go back to using that Elon Musk example of him in that warehouse with all those parts, just wondering, probably in the back of his head, is this all worth it? He sacrificed day after day to build Tesla, to build SpaceX, to build PayPal. He sacrificed constantly in order to build those things that every single human being has probably heard of, has used PayPal. They probably use PayPal. People use Teslas. SpaceX is used for space exploration. There's other business ventures that he's part of as well. Been a very polarizing figure the last couple of years, obviously, and some people dislike him, some people like him. But he's a good example of accepting the hard work and sacrifice it needs to get to the mountaintop. He never gave up when he was sitting on that warehouse floor looking at all those different parts. Never gave up. He pushed through, and then he built all those different companies. How does this apply to creative self-improvement and people reinventing themselves? The second bullet point is take responsibility for your actions. Simple as that. I'm going to get into an example of my own life shortly that just happened a couple weeks ago. A mindset shift, habit, or real-world example. The greatest leaders are those that accept responsibility for their actions and decisions, especially when they don't work out. It's when they don't accept when they messed up, when they have a scapegoat. That's when I don't respect them. To be the person you want to be, you need to accept the responsibility of your actions. Real-world example is being stuck in traffic. You can blame all the cars. You can blame the person that got pulled over on the highway. You can blame, the car accident. You can blame everything. It comes down, just take the blame for yourself. You could have left earlier. That's how I always say. If I get stuck in traffic and I'm kind of in a rush to go somewhere, I could have left earlier. I could have left 5-10 minutes earlier. And I might have avoided it. As simple as that. Even then, if you're stuck in traffic, you're late to your thing. It's just like, okay, well, it's not the end of the world. And then move on. And the last thing I'm going to discuss for this is something in my own life. So I just mentioned something happened to me about 2 weeks ago. So my assistant sent something to a client of mine that we weren't supposed to send. And I called my client to tell him, hey, we accidentally sent this to someone else. I'm sorry, it was my fault. I didn't delete this from the system, and it automatically got tied in when we sent you that email. I felt horrible. I took responsibility. I profusely apologized. I could have very easily blamed my assistant. And I told her the next day when I saw her, I'm sorry, it's my fault. And she was like, no, I shouldn't have said that. I should have known better. It's like, no, I'm sorry. It's my fault. I'm going to take responsibility. I'm not going to throw you under the bus because I could have done something about this sooner. I could have deleted this from the system sooner. It would have been super easy to blame my assistant. Other people do blame her for their mistakes. I just don't know why, because I think that always comes back to bite you at some point in time. When you blame others for your mistakes, I think karma comes back at some point in time. So when you take responsibility, as uncomfortable as it is in that moment, it's the best thing to do. And I felt so much better about myself that I took the responsibility. If I blamed my assistant for sending that email, I would have felt horrible. I would have felt like a weak human being, a weak man. Take responsibility for the things that are good and bad, especially the bad. Take responsibility for more things that happen to you. You're going to be glad you started doing that because it frees you up. If you constantly blame other people, you probably just you don't feel so good. There's like this fog in your brain, I would assume. I used to blame people for some of my mistakes, and I just didn't feel good about myself. It didn't feel natural. I felt bad. That's going to do it for this episode. The price of greatness is responsibility. Winston Churchill. But episode 1 is in the books. If this quote hits you, then share it with someone that you think could benefit from it, someone that's going through something similar in their own life, or someone that may need to take more responsibility for their actions. I appreciate every single one of you that tuned into this episode, and I'm going to see you on the next one.